Boundless Authenticity Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Boundless Authenticity Podcast. Today, Steve Frazier returns. You might remember Steve from Quit Caffeine for Good. And just to reiterate, Steve is a wellness coach, entrepreneur, and founder of Release the Coffee Cups, a viral wellness movement dedicated to helping people overcome caffeine addiction naturally. Steve is also a certified self-sabotage coach and has a lot to say on the topic and how it extends into topics like immigration and societal self-sabotage. So, Steve, what's been going on since the last time we talked?
I've been doing a lot of work with self-sabotage, and I actually advanced that a little bit to go into societal self-sabotage, because you and I have chatted on and off about what's going on in not just our countries, but all over the Caribbean and all over the world. So what I'd like to do is just touch on just basic definitions of self-sabotage. Okay, and that really is when we as individuals undermine our own morals and values. And there's a lot to unpack there. There's 4 or 5 pillars in self-sabotage. There's the physical pillar, there's spiritual, there's emotional, there's financial, there's intelligence. So that would be 5. Sometimes we put the emotion and intelligence together. And, to look at one specifically, perhaps the physical pillar is the most crucial one. And I'm not downplaying the spiritual pillar, but if you're healthy, you can do anything. And if you are not healthy, all you think about is your health. And I live this every day. My wife is chronically ill. 13 years ago, she got Lyme disease, right? So 2 years undiagnosed. And so we live every day, one day at a time. And that sounds weird. Okay. It sounds so cliche, right? But so many people, your listeners, even myself sometimes, I take my health for granted. And then I look at her and I realize that I have something that is priceless, because I can do anything I want when I'm healthy. And so when we look at the pillar of the physical pillar, that includes caffeine, which we've talked about, includes alcohol, includes nicotine, includes drugs, prescription drugs, overeating, not sleeping. All these things are crucial to then strengthening the other pillars. So we've got spiritual, the battle between good and evil, depending on what you believe. I happen to believe in God and Jesus Christ, the triune God. Okay. That's where I come from. That's not a preach. Okay. That's a statement. That's an objective truth. But we have to, if people don't believe in something, society will fall apart. Now, as I'm talking about these things, realize that we are going to expand on these from a societal aspect shortly. Okay, you've got financial self-sabotage. Okay, the United States is an excellent example. We keep going in debt, higher and higher. It's $36 trillion, and they're just adding to it. Okay, no financial responsibility. As individuals, we have that same responsibility to ourselves and our families to be somewhat responsible and not just continue to borrow money and rack up debt. Because that's, and I know the United States probably isn't the only country that's doing that. You have the emotional, we have to take care of ourselves. And when we are challenged, we need to get help. Okay, I've been there. I had a therapist for 18 years, and I didn't see her for 18 years straight. But when I needed her, what I did is I went and talked to her, and it's so bizarre in hindsight, because I haven't seen her now for 8 to 10 years. And in hindsight, because hindsight is absolutely golden, I realized that she never did anything for me other than allow me to talk and then guide me. She never told me what to do other than the last session. I walked in and we kind of knew I was done, at least for a while. I was feeling pretty good mentally. And I looked at her and I said, I only have one regret from coming to see you. And that is that I feel that it was such a weakness that I had to come to you to get help. And it's the only time in that whole 18-year span that she corrected me. And she looked at me and she said, "No, Steve, you're wrong. That was one of the most strongest and courageous things that you've ever done. Because I needed somebody to guide me through those tough times. You know, there was some depression, there were some financial issues, and she allowed me to think straight." In other words, at that point, she was the adult in the room. Now, when we look at our governments, you think, who's the adult here? Is there any adulting going on? We keep spending, we keep doing this, we keep doing that, and as you know, it's fracturing our societies. And then you have that was the emotional, the intelligence one. It goes with the emotional one, I believe. I think it can be in the same pillar. You know, we can be the smartest people in the world. It doesn't mean we're going to do the right things, because common sense seems to be lost all over the place. Do you have any thoughts on that before I move into societal self-sabotage?
Common sense has definitely assessed the situation and left the planet. And common sense doesn't want to be here anymore because it realizes that nobody is receptive to it anymore. And
right.
If I was common sense, I would leave the room too. So,
yeah.
You know, I have a difficult time with my self-sabotage clients because the number one thing that I hear from them is, I've been through traditional counseling and psychotherapy and it did not work for me. My therapist just listened to what I said, gave me advice that didn't work, and sent me on my way. Or the other most common thing is they just wanted to give me pills. They diagnosed me and sent me on my way. There are a lot of psychotherapists that I know personally. Some have been on this show. They are doing their part to train other therapists and break that cycle. I commend them for that. But we got a long, long way to go in terms of mental health, because get back to our topic, we are living, as Jason Christoff would say, on planet mind control.
Yes.
And so I will add additional context to what you're about to say and then let you jump off on that.
Sure.
When you meet the average person in the street and you ask them, "Sir, can I ask you an important question? What are your top 5 values?" Or if I have a client come to me and I say, "Do you know what your values are?" Because the values are like the rudder for your ship. Without it, you will just go in every direction, wherever the waves take you. They're like, "I'm not sure." Or sometimes if they do know, integrity is not one of them. So if you are literally like a fish and you take a fish out of a pond, the fish is electromagnetically and biologically imprinted with the signature of the water that it was born in. Mm-hmm. You put it in a tank and you keep putting tap water in it. Eventually that fish is going to mysteriously die and you're going to say, "Okay, I don't know what I did wrong. I made sure the water was clean." That's the excuse that governments use. We're just making sure that the water is clean. But as we know, as a human being or any other living being, when your environment becomes toxic because there's something that's foreign to it that you're not accustomed to, it will eventually degrade your health mentally, physically, spiritually, until you suffer the consequences or death. So the question I would like for people to ask themselves as they're listening to this is, how can you really know what you believe is 100% true? You can't. unless you live in a way that you are constantly questioning your beliefs about everything. But also realize that even empowering beliefs carry limitations. And that is one of the core facets of recognizing self-sabotage as it extends to societal control and manipulation. Now, fortunately, we get to talk about this topic at this time because a large number of people are now becoming suspicious where they ordinarily would not have been suspicious of the government.
Right.
So, along with that, understand that we're being manipulated, and manipulation doesn't accomplish anything positive because manipulation and liberation are two different polarities altogether. Freedom can't control anything. What is a belief? A belief is a concept you've validated and you've held on to it based on some information that you have used to form a conclusion in your own mind. So once you form a conclusion, that's it. That's the end for you. So I'll let you take it away, because when you're talking about societal self-sabotage, people will get very frustrated very quickly, and they're not going to want to hear what you have to say next. And so I've laid the groundwork. You can go.
Well, yeah, you laid great groundwork there. One of the things that you just mentioned in your last sentence was when people, they get these facts or what they believe are facts, and then they come to a conclusion, and that's that. And that creates something called cognitive dissonance, which is when people are presented with objective truths. They just say that can't be right because it goes against everything that they've been programmed to believe from birth to at that point in their life, whether they're 20, 50, 70, it doesn't matter. And overcoming that, and that's I'm doing this with caffeine. I'm doing this with self-sabotage. People don't want to hear it. And so what they do is walk away. I had a client, they paid me $1,000 to go into my self-sabotage program. And part of the deal is you have to be accountable. And so when I sent them the questionnaire, which is 13 pages long, and it takes hours and hours to fill out because it's in depth. Because if you really want to fix yourself, you have to look at yourself and you have to be honest. You have to be honest to yourself. It's not about me. It's about the client. I saw him a month later, the guy, and I said, Dave, how are you doing? Are we going to be able to get together pretty soon? You're going to finish that up? And he looked at me and he said, well, after 4 pages, I realized I really didn't want to do this. I realized he had 9 more pages to go. Okay. And he hadn't even gotten to the tough stuff yet. And what it is that his cognitive dissonance for the truth was so overwhelming that he couldn't continue because he didn't want to know about himself. Now, when we look at our societies, I'm in the United States, you're in Barbados. I've been to Barbados. Okay. It's been a while. When I was there, it's completely different than what it is now, I'm sure, because I was there, I think, 25 or 30 years ago. And I enjoyed it immensely. But things have changed so dramatically since that, just in that 20 to 30 years. And I'm going to start out by reading a basic explanation of societal self-sabotage. So it sets the groundwork for what we're going to talk about. Societal self-sabotage occurs when immigration intake outpaces a nation's ability to integrate newcomers into, and these are the key things, a shared language, work, civic norms, and trust. So assimilation does not equal erasing culture. Assimilation equals shared operating rules that allows diverse people to function as one society. Now, I have 2 personal stories of societal self-sabotage. And I'm in northern Wisconsin. And I've traveled to Minneapolis, and I've traveled to Milwaukee and Chicago. I mean, I've traveled all over. But I actually, so we'll talk about the situation in Minneapolis right now with the Somalis, okay? And anybody that is not living under a rock is probably aware of the fraud situation with the daycare centers and the number of things. And right now it's tied not almost exclusively to the Somali population. So let's go back and let's talk about some history here. About 15 to 20 years ago, whenever Barack Obama was president, there was a Somali civil war. And what they did is they brought a whole bunch of Somalis over here as a result of the civil war. They didn't have any place to go. And apparently we felt responsible. They were all getting massacred. So what he did is he put them all into, not all of them, but many of them into one congressional district, which is just on the southwest, southeast side of Minneapolis. And that's where Ilhan Omar is the representative. And she has declared publicly that Somalia is her priority, not the United States. And her net worth when she became a congressman in 2017 was minus $65,000. Today, her net worth is $30 million, and she makes $174,000 a year. Now, I'm not here to tell you where that came from. I'm here to tell you that that is not normal. Not in our society, okay? People just don't. Now, unfortunately, that is kind of normal in our political environment. Most of the people in our Congress are multimillionaires, and they weren't before they got into Congress. And again, you go back to Barack Obama, went from having a net worth of $500,000 to being worth $50 or $100 million because he was president. Okay, how is this happening? So when we get back to the Somalis, I was there twice. I was in that area. I was in a different business. My wife when she got sick, she created a pasta. It was non-GMO, no grains, no gluten. So I would go into these co-ops, and one of the co-ops was right in the middle of the Somali population. And I was there twice. And both times I was there, I probably experienced roughly 100 to 150 Somalis come by me in a 2 to 3 hour time. So there were a lot of people, and it was a beautiful, beautiful co-op. Of those 200 to 300 people that came through, I only had one young boy come up and sample my pasta. I realize these are free samples. Okay, I'm giving them out. I got a spiel. I can talk to anybody. He not only was the only one that tried my pasta, he was the only one that ever made eye contact with me. Now realize that this is not normal in our society in the United States, in the northern part of the United States. We generally talk to people, they stop and chat. Even if they don't want to try my pasta, they acknowledge me or say hi or ask my story, right? So then we'll go forward about 3 years. And I randomly met a former teacher of my two of my kids in a small community just north of where I live. And she had retired. And then she got bored, so she took a job teaching English as a second language to the Somalis in that area. And she had, these are personal insights. Now realize this is secondhand. I'm firsthand. I heard it right from her. She said, I wanted to tell you something, Steve, that nobody knows and nobody seems to care about, is that these Somali people that she was teaching English as a second language, and they're mostly kids, but not all of them, they despise you. Sometimes to the point of hate, because they're strict Muslims, and the radical faction of the Muslim religion of Islam says that anybody that doesn't believe should be put to death. Now, I'm not telling you by any means that I was ever threatened. I was not threatened ever at all when I was there. But her observation to me was that they despise you. And the last thing she said to me, she said, all they want is our money. Now, fast forward to today. There's a couple 100,000 Somalis in that area. 80% of the Somali population in the state of Minnesota is on welfare. Now, I put that into perspective. That's phenomenal. Now, when we talk about, so I'll stop for a second, because when we talk about self-sabotage, one of the first things when I do a self-sabotage presentation is I tell them right out, just so you know, a lot of the bad things that you're doing are not your fault. I'm literally making an excuse for them while I'm speaking to them about self-sabotage. And why is that? Because we've been programmed to believe certain things. As an example, back in the 60s and early 70s, how many ads promoted cigarette smoking that was actually good for you? I mean, I have newspaper ads that show paper cigarette ads and newspaper ads that say this particular cigarette is better for you if you're pregnant and smoking, right? So, and when you hear this enough time, you go back to the jab campaign, safe and effective. You got to wear a mask. Okay, you got to be 6 feet apart. That 6 feet thing, a guy in England made that up out of nowhere, right? There was never, and there never has been, any scientific thoughts on why we had to be 6 feet apart. Now, I'm going to make a statement here. I never went for any of it. I didn't wear a mask. You know, when it first started, I was the only guy in the grocery store without one. They let me in. But and people would come up to me and they'd say, "Why? How can you get away with this?" I said, "Because it's all crap, and they know it, and they're enforcing these air quote rules which somebody just made up." So we go back to the Somalis I'm picking on them because it's a firestorm right now, and I was there, and I have some experience there. Part of the problem there was that they were just dumped in there altogether. And they were never required to assimilate. And I read that assimilation thing when I first started here. Assimilation is not trying to change your culture. Assimilation is not trying to change your values. However, you go back to my ancestors. My great-grandma came across from Europe on a boat when she was 4 years old, which would have been in the late 1800s. My grandma told me this. Realize I'm 68 years old, so you have to put that into perspective. You know, my great grandma literally was 4 years old in the late 1800s. What did they do? They came through the Statue of Liberty. They wanted to speak English so that they could communicate with people. They wanted to assimilate in our society because our society was successful. Capitalism was great. And if you look at all the places, you know, where capitalism had worked really well, it's because the people worked hard to get something for themselves. Not necessarily for someone. Often, many times, they were small butcher shops or whatever the case. But now you look at what happened when they dumped all this one ethnic group into one area. When they came in, they were never told, you need to learn how to speak English. You need to go by our rules. And you need to adapt to our values. Okay? Which basically, the values in the United States are Judeo-Christian based values, okay? And that's not a religious thing. It's based on forgiveness and love your neighbor, forgiveness, whatever. They had a system in Somali that was based on clans. And it's a very unique system because if you ever, there's a movie years and years ago, decades, called Black Hawk Down, where the United States tried to go in and intervene in the Somali Civil War, and it did not end well. It didn't end well for 1,000 or 2,000 Somalis who were killed by our military. I think 19 soldiers were killed. But it was all based on clans. And because the government was so corrupt that the only way that they could be safe was to create their own clans. In other words, their own safety net. So when they came to the United States, they felt that no one was taking care of them, and realistically, they weren't. They dumped them all in, they threw some money at them, and they threw some housing at them, and while the money bought the food, and they said, here you go, with no assimilation, no attempt to get them into our society. And by putting them all in the same spot, it allowed them to create their own system. Okay, here's the catch. That really is the big catch. Unfortunately, they have chosen not to assimilate into our society. Now, we'll go back to just the last 2 weeks in that area. It's determined that the Somali daycare and healthcare frauds have added up to billions of dollars, with probably the acknowledgement and understanding and approval of the state government. So there's going to be a lot of heads roll. Obviously, if you're not aware of this, the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, who actually ran for vice president last year, he this week determined that he wasn't going to run for governor because he said that this fraud thing is too distracting. Okay, the guy could end up in jail, literally, with the amount of money that's been stolen. But you can spin this any way you want. He admitted by not running again that he's guilty. Okay, because he can't overcome this, and it's bad. It's brutal, and it goes through the whole state government, because when you start to look at that level of fraud, these people had to know about it, because it's just billions of dollars just don't slip in. $1 million here, $1 million there, maybe, but billions? No, it doesn't happen. So now they get all defensive, the Somalis, and they say, well, we're not doing this. They're just in denial, and yet there's been a number of people that have gone, and there's no kids in these daycare centers that are getting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in federal money, and there's no kids there. There's an ad, and I saw this posted, and I saw it was a Craigslist ad. Craigslist is like a one ads kind of thing on the internet. They were looking for child actors. 3 days. They needed to act for 3 days for $1,500 a day to be actors as children in a daycare center. I can't make this up. I mean, that is one. It's funny. I find it kind of funny because, first of all, when you do this, everybody sees it. This isn't just the actors; it's everybody. Obviously, that's how I saw it. But they're hiring people to bring their kids into their daycares now to show the public that they actually have kids in their daycares. Okay. Now, is this all their fault? No, I admit it. It's not all they're trying to survive. Unfortunately, they're stealing all of our money. Okay, my money, I pay taxes. Okay, my taxes are going to them, and they own Cadillacs, they own Escalades, they own big houses. They are sending money all over the world, particularly sending money back to Somalia. And this has already been kind of tracked. And some of it's possibly going back to their clans, which some of them are related to potential terrorist groups. Okay, so it's a big funnel. What's the answer? The answer is simply that you force assimilation And when I say that, and I have some questions, and I'll go over them in a couple minutes, this isn't about race. This is about a particular group of people who have chosen to defraud us, and now they're saying that it was not all their fault. Well, it's not all their fault, but it's mostly their fault because they're actually doing it. Because the successful Somali Americans that live there and around the United States, many of them are not fraudsters, okay? Many of them have opened successful businesses. But they've also then assimilated to the point where they can talk to me if I'm a customer and treat me with respect as I treat them. It's a two-way street. It has to go both ways. Now, there's another group that I'm very familiar with, and that is Hmong Americans. Okay, and many people don't know about these people because they've assimilated fairly well. The Hmongs are a group of people that were in Southeast Asia, and this all came around during the end of the Vietnam War. We went in there. I mean, I don't know how much you know about it. It was just made up. It was one of the United States made up wars. No idea. They did it to build up and promote the military-industrial complex. So it was all about money. You realize rarely is any of this ever about freedom or democracy. It's about money because, I mean, you look at, I think 50 to 60,000 Americans died in the Vietnam War. I've been to the Vietnam War Memorial in D.C. several times. It's incredibly sad to see all these guys that died just so that people could make money because we weren't freeing anyone. We never had a chance to free South Vietnam because North Vietnam had all these people that wanted to take it over and we couldn't stop them. I grew up in that era. I was at the end of that. I graduated from high school in 75, and that's when the war ended. So anyway, all these people, these Hmong people were helping us, and they were from that whole region, not just Vietnam. They were from Laos and Cambodia. And so the Catholic Church decided that they were going to bring them over here. And they did. And so of the three major Hmong populations, the biggest one is in California, the second is Minneapolis, the third is in my hometown of Wausau, Wisconsin. I have two nieces that married Hmong brothers. It's kind of weird, not weird, but two sisters married two brothers. They're both Hmong. They all worked for me. I was in the restaurant business this was back in the late 80s. And they were second generation Hmongs. The first generation Hmongs did not assimilate well. Some of them learned how to speak English, but many of them did not. They still believed that they still have their own religions, whatever that is. Some of them have converted into Christianity or whatever their choice would be. So in my time in the restaurant business, I probably had somewhere between 10 and 15 different Hmong employees. They were incredibly hard workers. Yeah, I have the utmost respect for them. And one of my restaurants was in a downtown mall. And I walked out about in the middle of the afternoon, and I walked out the back door, and there was a group of 8 to 10 Hmong kids just hanging out. And I bring this up because I walked through them and I was never threatened and they never harassed me. Probably a couple of them said hi. I don't remember. But my takeaway is that second generation had already assimilated to our society. They didn't look at me as a threat, as a rich white guy. Now, first of all, I wasn't rich. I just happened to be a white guy that owned a restaurant. And if you've ever been in the restaurant business, you know that there's not a lot of rich people in the restaurant business, okay? Most of them are just struggling to stay alive. I did well there, okay? However, in my experience with them, and so I got to know these people quite well, okay? And my nieces learned to make fantastic egg rolls. I will tell you that. That was a bonus for us. At family gatherings, we always got to eat these egg rolls that they learned from their mother-in-laws. where am I going with this? Is that it's simply that they were assimilated better through that Catholic Church. They helped them learn English. They helped them to adapt to the societal norms of the United States, of our area. Now, as in every ethnicity, wow, that was a tough one. They're bad actors. Okay. And so people always want to say, well, look at the gangs, you know. Well, there's white gangs, there's black gangs, there's brown gangs, there's Hmong gangs. It doesn't matter. Okay. There's bad actors in every race. And so don't look at that. They are not a representation of the Hmong community. Just as I believe that the fraudsters in Minneapolis of the Somalis are not a representative of the Somali people. However, there's so many of them, and the fraud was so large that you begin to think that, are they all like that, right? Now you look at Dearborn, Michigan. Now that is 55% Muslim. I believe their city council is almost exclusively Muslim, their mayor. What they've tried to do there, and in some cases it's working, is they've instituted Sharia law. The Constitution of the United States is no longer relevant. Now, one of the things that when I read that first statement, you know, and I'm gonna go back to it, is that we need to integrate newcomers into shared language, work, civic norms, and trust. Now, this country is not cohesive with Sharia law. It's one or the other. You can't have them both because there's too many differences, and they go against often many of the beliefs in our society here. So what's the end game? Well, if they keep pushing this, there's going to be civil unrest, as there is in Minneapolis right now, and that's all been drummed up by paid protesters. You know, the grassroots efforts in the United States are rarely normal, everyday people. They are paid protesters, and I caught a snippet on social media from Laura Ingraham, who has a show on Fox every night. She was on the ground, and they did this live. I saw the recording, but there was this lady there, and she was protesting about ICE and about this and that and whatever, the fraud. Leave them alone. Just let it go, right? Just ignore it. And Laura said, so why aren't you working? What do you do for a living? And the woman said something out loud that she was not supposed to say. She said, I am getting paid. Now, and Laura literally turned around, looked at the camera, and went like this. Talk about, I mean, obviously she wasn't supposed to say that. Now, if you are aware what happened, I think it's like 2 days ago, there was a woman shot by an ICE agent. And it's an uproar, okay? And the first things there that were brought up were that she was innocent, that she was this fine, upstanding young Christian woman, and she has 3 kids, and now her kids don't have a mom. Well, it turns out that her and her wife, because she's a lesbian, her wife was outside of the car filming this because they were filming content to put on the internet to show how bad ICE was, okay? This is a fact. This is an objective fact because they have a recording of this woman, the wife, after this Good was shot. That was her name, Good. She said, oh my gosh, this is all my fault. I made her come here. Now, it turns out that both of them are in an organization called ICE Watch. And what they do is they go wherever they have a network, and realize this is well funded, okay? They have a network, so whenever ICE shows up to do an operation. Now, ICE are police officers. It's immigration and customs. They're looking for illegals, okay? Illegals are criminals. That's an objective fact. Okay, if you're here illegally, you are a criminal by definition. Okay, now they're not rounding up everybody. They're generally going after actually the convicted criminals or robbers, murderers, rapists, whatever. So is there ever going to be 10 million people deported? I don't know. I don't think so, because I don't know where they're going to put them, right? We've talked, and we'll talk about this in a couple minutes, because I did watch that video you sent me about they're going to ship them off to the Caribbean. Well, all they're going to do is create chaos, right? But anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. So I'll go back to this woman. She had her car parked in the middle of the road, obstructing them. It's very apparent from multiple angles that they begged her to get out of the car. They gave her more than one warning. They're only required to give her one warning by law. They begged her. And unfortunately, the one guy walked in front of the car. I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent, because if you look at the videos, he walked in front of the car and she turned the wheels and she accelerated. And the only reason he's alive today is because there was ice on the road and her wheels spun before it took off. And this is, I watched a frame by frame breakdown of this. And the car hit him and he pulled his gun and he shot her. Now, the backstory there is in June of last year, this same officer was dragged 100 feet by a protester like this, and he had 33 stitches in his legs. So he had some history. Obviously, that's not a good thing for that woman, okay? And I am not telling you that she deserved this. She did not. No one deserves to die like this at all. She put herself in a position where she didn't listen to law enforcement, and they call them Gestapo, they call them Nazis. These guys are doing their job, okay? She didn't have to be there. There was no good ending to this anywhere. And now they're going to riot, and they're going to get paid to riot. And back in the days, back when George Floyd which was 5 years ago, the riots in Minneapolis, where they burnt the city down, basically. I have seen documented videos of where all of a sudden on a street corner, a pallet of bricks would appear. And what did they do? They opened them up and they threw them through windows and they threw them at cars. Okay. Who paid for that? Well, at the end of the day, it's probably George Soros and his group. Okay. That's just one of the groups. Okay. And these are globalists. Why are they want to create anarchy because they want to overthrow. They want to overthrow the government. Now, the way things are right now, this isn't going to happen because the new president, love him or hate him, isn't going to tolerate this, where Joe Biden did. And he just let it go. And so what do we have a responsibility as? So we go back to the monks. So now we're now in third generation, right? They have completely assimilated into our society. I went and had lunch with my grandson yesterday. He's in second grade. And two of the kids that sat with us were Asian. And they're the greatest, cutest kids. And we have this great conversation. And my grandson talks to them. They don't, and this is hard to believe for some people, my grandson doesn't see their color. Today, he's at his dad's house, and he is having a young East Asian girl, Southern East Asian girl, over to his house for a play date. This is one of his best friends. This, back in segregation days, you couldn't talk to a black person in the United States or you were looked down on. Now, these people have assimilated into our society. I did this girl that's coming over to his house back in October. My daughter and I had a memorial service for Charlie Kirk on his birthday. And, I was a fan of Charlie Kirk. Love him. Again, you don't have to like him. I don't care. It doesn't matter. He spoke the truth. He was honest, and he always gave an opportunity for people to voice opinions that he didn't agree with. And so, as far as that goes, that you can't argue with anyone about because he did. and he was very honest and open. He would tell them right out, I don't agree with you, and why, and then he would go into why. Well, anyway, we had this memorial service, and it was outside. It was 50 degrees and raining. We had 160 people show up with umbrellas, and we had candlelights. It was pretty cool. We played videos, and we sang worship songs and did some prayers. This girl and her mom showed up. They came to this, which means that they assimilated to the point where they wanted to see what was going on. And this was free will, and free won't, right? And nobody had to come to this. If it wouldn't have rained, we'd have had 300 or 400 people there. It was terrible. I could see my breath. My laptop almost got destroyed. My mice, it was chaos, right? Because we're under a little tent. Bottom line is, where I'm going with this is that if they choose to assimilate into our society, things will go well. But they need help sometime. You know, back in that 30 years ago, when this was all happening, 20 to 30 years ago, every grade school in this area had to have a teacher that spoke Hmong and English to teach the kids how to speak English, and sometimes actually translate for them. I mean, I'm not telling you it was easy. It was not easy. It cost a lot of money. But they took proactive measures to help these people assimilate. Language is crucial to assimilation. You know, my German and French and Scandinavian ancestors came here and learned how to speak English. They still spoke Polish. Like some of these kids, some of my nieces, my niece's husbands, they still speak when they go to their grandparents' house, and their parents sometimes speak Hmong. But when they come out, they speak English like you and I, possibly better. Who knows, right? It comes down to, what can we do to help them? However, they need to want to assimilate. And when you bring your culture into the United States and say, this is how we're going to live now in the United States, that isn't going to work. And I'm not, this is not a threat, okay? This is a foreshadow of what is to come. The more powerful they become, at some point, the normal, average, everyday American, and this is not white, this is white, black, and brown, and Asian, are going to push back. Because if you look at what Sharia law is, and I'm not going to get into this in depth, okay? But look at how submissive they make their women. I mean, they have to wear the hijab, they sometimes burqas, their whole face has to be covered. If they don't do that, they're beaten, sometimes killed. Okay, they do some pretty gross genital mutilation of young women. Okay, and again, I don't need to get into it. You can research it yourself. It's real. It's the truth. Okay, they don't deny this because they don't want their women to enjoy sex. That they're there for one reason, that's to have kids. And that is one of the reasons why their population is exploding, because they are expanding all over the world because they have multiple children where the regular population is not. So you look at different countries, okay, and I have a list. And if you look at Paris as an example. I mean, how many no-go zones are in Paris, right? They canceled Christmas celebrations in Paris because they felt that they were going to be too dangerous for Islamic jihadists. They would terrorize and blow them up. So they canceled it. So all the people that used to do this now can't do this. And when is enough? You know, what they did, and this is documented over the last 10 to 15 years, they opened up the borders, which the United States did in the 4 years previous to Donald Trump. They opened up and they let anybody in that wanted to come, generally unvetted. Where do they go? How do they work? They work illegally. They work, and so what they do is, and this is everywhere. So this would be across every country. You come in, and the guys that take advantage of them, they pay them half of what, or maybe or less of what they would have to pay one of their fellow countrymen. Now their countrymen don't have a job, and these people are getting paid cash. They're not paying taxes. They're not doing anything. What's the answer? The answer is you have to go back to where we screwed up. And when I say we, I'm going to say every government that did this, and it's across the board. You know, even Japan, which hasn't really allowed a lot of immigration. They have put in policies because they're running out of people to work. Japan is. I don't know if you're aware of that. You know, their birth rate is like 1.1 or 1.2, and repopulation, or to keep the population even, is 2.3 or 2.4 kids per couple, right? They're in the ones. So they're losing population. So what they do is they bring in people from Southeast Asia and India and Pakistan, whatever the case, doesn't matter. And they make the citizenship requirements almost impossible. So they can be there for 20 years and they still might not be able to be a citizen. I have a friend who's came from India. He works for HVAC, air conditioning, heating, things like that. And he's worked for me on and off for the last 5 years. He came from India. It took him 12 years to become a citizen of the United States.
Yeah, I would like to jump in. So you're talking about maybe around 12 years ago, I was an immigrant to the United States of America. I have family history. I have uncles, aunts. My grandmother was a legal citizen of the United States of America. When she traveled to the United States, she was fairly old, but her dream was to pursue her lifelong dream of being a primary infant care facilitator. She wanted to do that and spend the rest of her life, the last 20 years of her life doing that. She went through the system. She was carefully vetted. She was placed into an area that would be safe and appropriate for her. This is in Hempstead, Long Island.
Okay.
She was given all of the tools that she needed. She already spoke English. She was born in Trinidad, moved to Barbados when she was 8, became a Barbadian citizen. And then, she spent most of her life here. It was easy and it was a welcoming environment. Other immigrants from the Caribbean, etc., at that time were welcomed with open arms, and it created a thriving society. In my experience, it was the exact opposite. Now, the route I had to go was I had to get a lawyer, an immigration lawyer, who would file on my behalf and make sure that even if the paperwork wasn't necessarily functioning according to standards during the transition periods of extending the visa, that there were certain things that immigration was aware of while they were continuing to renew the files, etc. And it was a tedious and expensive process. So I would argue that the average person who didn't have help from family and have a bank account that has enough money in it to sustain that would not have been able to do what I did. So my experience of it, this is around 2014, Obama was still around, was that the system was designed to, as you just said, make it very, very difficult for anyone to become integrated into society, to become a legal participant long before they even were fast-tracked into naturalization or anything like that. And that, I realized, was by design. So in the area that I was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, there were very, very, very few legal immigrants in that area living. Now, I understand the purpose of ICE. It is true. They're police officers who are just working for immigration control. It's literally in the title, Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Right, yeah.
What does that mean? It means that they are just simply tasked with vetting people. And it doesn't mean that they're going to stop you on the street because they hear you speaking Spanish or when I passed them, I would say, "Hey, what's going on?" And they could hear, that I wasn't local, but they didn't attack you. In fact, I've spoken to many of them because I've done so many public events and stuff as a performer, spoken to police. Nobody cares. They don't care. They don't want to isolate you or attack you or make you feel unwelcome or anything like that. That is my personal firsthand experience. Yep. And they're fascinated. They're like, I've had ICE agents and police officers sit and drink beer with me and just chill out, and talk and ask questions about Barbados and all those different things, ask questions out of genuine interest, not out of trying to figure out what I'm doing in the country.
Right.
Now, the media perpetuates that narrative repetitively that if you are immigrating to the United States, you're trying to steal something from the country. And that is what has laid the foundation for what we're seeing now, because now they're actually the government officials who we know are corrupt and are overreaching, are setting up this scenario so that we all go against each other. And eventually there will be this massive pushback, like you just said, because no one understands exactly what side of the fence they're on. We're all on the same side, except maybe the Somalis, etc., who are coming from a destructive mentality, a war-torn country. Yeah. And they have a militant narrative that they're born into, so they're conditioned to think that everybody other than them is the enemy. So that's where the problem lies in your situation. And I had to give up and leave. Plus, I had other things happening in my family that I needed to be back here. But I had to give up because it became more and more difficult to extend my visa. And there were more hoops you had to jump through. And there was a lot of... So Immigration and Customs Enforcement is actually slightly different from DHS. So DHS is the problem because they're the ones that are making threats against people. You should get out now. They'll send a letter to your house. You should get out of the country. All these different things that they do. So the system is designed, even when you are trying to get a visa to travel to the United States just for business, and this is B1, B2, visitor for pleasure or business, they don't want you. You enter the U.S. Embassy on Barbadian soil. They don't even want you in there. They treat you like you are a second-rate individual, right? And these individuals are all conditioned into this reality to treat you like that. Some of them don't want to. Some of them are okay. And some of them, I remember in 2012 when I went to renew my visa, there was a woman outside. I still remember her face. She was crying and smoking a cigarette. She was crying because her job is so difficult. She has all of these rules and regulations that she has to conform to whether she likes it or not.
Right.
I am just trying to paint a balanced picture for the audience, not for you, because you know what's going on, right? You understand all of this conditioning and programming and all the stuff that we're all fighting against. And you have these basic tools that are used against us. So everything is reframed to fit the narrative, no matter what you say. The repeated affirmations are used to instill the narrative into you, possibly from when you're young. So you don't know what to think by the time you're able to think for yourself. You have imitative learning where you just, because of mirror neurons in your brain, that you want to emulate common behavior in your environment by default. So you fight against that. And then the government is using distraction, denial, delusion, cancel culture, silence, and when they're called on anything, to maneuver around these things on top of all of the conditioning. So to see clearly in an environment like that, you have to know how to navigate through the fog, right? And the problem is that most people are so afraid and second guess themselves and second guess their intuition because we've been beaten down. And between now and the last time we spoke, I got deplatformed, I suspect, for saying that government overreach is the number one problem in society.
Yep.
It is no longer that the system is set up to facilitate growth for anyone. It's all about them making the conglomerates and the corporate figureheads and the Rothschilds, right, doing their bidding. mass non-compliance is the only option that we have. Mass non-compliance doesn't mean rioting. They want you to riot. They want you to protest. They want you to, because that ultimately means you're turning against each other and playing inside of the narrative.
Yes.
Mass non-compliance means we all talk to each other about our differences and figure out where we actually fit together, because that's what differences are for. It's like a puzzle piece. You look at two pieces in a puzzle and you're like, okay, well, that doesn't fit. Let me get the other piece. You put it in it and you start to see a picture will form.
Yes. That's a great analogy.
If only the average person understood that all you have to do to create a hostile environment is to convince some group of people of a threat. You create a false concept about the world being dangerous if a certain behavior isn't executed or a certain set of rules isn't executed. You use those repeated affirmations and implant a reframing every time somebody questions it, or you use the media to disseminate false information. And like you were saying in that video clip, that lady, you can tell she has good intentions. And like, there's a lot of people that talk about Tucker Carlson and stuff like that too. And unless you sit down with him and have lunch with him and talk to him about what he's about, you will never know what his intentions are. But I would say he largely had good intentions when he was a part of the corporate media. And now that he's left, he's able to grow as a person and try to correct his wrongs, the things he's participated in that fed into the mind control culture, right?
Yes.
So I think that everybody needs to start giving everybody a little bit of grace, give everybody a break, and try to figure out, does this person actually have good intentions with what they're creating? Are they being held in that position because they're just following orders, because they're just trying to do their job and feed their family? When you have a family to feed, it's a whole different equation than when you're just young and belligerent and you want to push against the system and things like that, all of these things become barriers to, not necessarily to critical thinking, but to your freedom, your independence, and your ability to think for yourself. So what the media is trying to do and what the government organizations are trying to do is they're trying to connect the dots for people to make sure that they understand their narrative, their reasoning as to how some atrocity came to be, which the story they tell you is never going to be the story that it actually is. Everything has just been orchestrated and engineered from the beginning of time to be the way that it is now.
Yeah.
And so that's how you keep that disempowerment going. I like to call the system the cult of global disempowerment, because essentially that's their goal. It doesn't matter what you think they are trying to get out of it. Ultimately, whatever is going on is leading to the destruction of social norms, the dissolving of language barriers, the violation of human rights, the obstruction of communication between differences and groups of people and family systems, the destruction of the family system, the destruction, the demolition of our critical thinking and our psyches, all of these different things, which then feeds into the sabotaging our health because we don't make good choices because we're stressed. And when you're stressed, you can't make good decisions because you're just operating on a how can I make it through the next hour mentality. And so we're stuck in this state of fear where people are so afraid to be wrong that even if they break their conditioning, they don't want to push against the system because they don't want to be victimized. Now, I've said all of that because that is exactly what is happening right here in Barbados. We have a prime minister. She is trained by the World Economic Forum, who we know is run by Klaus Schwab.
Yeah.
Who his mother is one of the Rothschilds, I believe, or is affiliated with that family. So it all leads back to the same direction. I don't like to use the term Jews because not every bloodline is Jewish, but they're all working for, it seems, a one or two. They're all working in tandem with one or two, right? It is ridiculous for somebody to be like, it's all Jews. And then you look at the Lee family and be like, yeah, they're clearly Asian though. Exactly. Asians are not Jews, Yeah. So people need, even conspiracy minded folks and stuff need to be more mature and ask deeper questions. So the same situation that's happening where you're at is happening here you have these construction magnates. One in particular, I'll say his name, Mark Maloney, who came into power in 2008 because he did some dirty deals with the elected then Prime Minister David Thompson, who was a known corrupt individual since the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if he had any affiliation with the cult of global disempowerment or World Economic Forum. I would say probably not, just because he was dumber than a bag of rocks. But he excelled at being corrupt. He did a lot of dirty deals with international criminal organizations and started the controlled demolition of our country. And I suspect that either consciously or unconsciously, that was done on purpose because it brought the country to its knees. It then led us towards the IMF, which we know is an international group of terrorists that go around preserving the cult of global disempowerment's rule by taking the economic structure of a country and making it incredibly difficult for the social structure to excel and for people to grow and for people to have an equal experience of at least comfort and the ability to spend, because the dollar then is devalued and it means nothing. The cost of living can then be jacked up, and the country, that construct, forever becomes indebted as a business to this International Monetary Fund, these loan sharks, and you never get out of that. It's the same thing as if you borrow $20,000 from the mafia. They'll come and break your kneecaps if you don't have it in the time you said you're going to pay it back, right? Mm-hmm. Until people understand these concepts, they're not going to see that the immigration thing is a key factor. So these construction magnates, as I said before, are employing Jamaicans, St. Lucians, Dominicans, Costa Ricans, people from Paraguay, Uruguay, all over the place, everywhere but here. You ask yourself a simple question: why am I going to a construction site and hearing a Jamaican voice in the security guard box? Yeah. And all she's doing is playing on her phone the whole day. So we don't have any Barbadians that can play on their phone for the whole day. Right? Yeah. The reason why they're doing that is because they can underpay these people. Yep. And then they send that money back to their country, to their families. Okay? We even have structures in place where students will come from other countries, Americans included, Canadians included, and live and work here and send all that shit back to their families. Yep. And you come here, you have something called the Welcome Stamp Program. The only money that the country receives out of that is when the individual goes shopping at the supermarket. Okay. They're working remotely or working for an offshore company, or they come in to do consulting, or they're engineers that come from Canada, United States, wherever, same Latin American countries. They take that money. Where does that money go? The construction magnates like Mark Maloney, for example, are being empowered by Mia Mottley, the prime minister, and given permissions because, like, I'm tied the two ideas together. So you go back to 2008, when this individual came into power, he got in by doing dirty dealings, being given projects by David Thompson, making a lot of money off the top. David Thompson's getting cut in on the deal. So with shared connections through, again, this is where people are not going to like where the conversation goes, but there's a lot of the Freemasonry aspect, because we do have a huge lodge community here. Really? And a larger portion of them, you talk to them, they don't know what's going on because they're just businessmen who are in the group for spiritual development and to increase their business and work together to become more affluent. They do good things around society and stuff like that. So it's not fair to attack them. But you have those that are on the higher echelons, which are primarily descendants of the plantocracy, the parasite class, the elites, from slave days, from sugar plantation days, etc. That try to maintain that stronghold. So there's a hierarchy and a structure to it. They will keep even the other, usually Black Barbadians under their thumb and keep them disempowered, and they can only reach a certain level of wealth and affluence, unless you pass through that barrier. These dirty deals that go on, campaign financing, extortion of funds, blackmailing, all these things prop up the system. And all these guys are involved in these systems. So you have this structure that's going up against me. I might have told you about it, where he basically just gave a certain number of millions of dollars in campaign funds to said prime minister, and she's agreed to look the other way.
Yep.
Now, there's a massive overdevelopment of the coastline here. I know this is happening in other countries, but I can only deal with here in my reality. And they're putting into place this tourism narrative. Now, we had another guy. He is lauded as a national hero, but he's a national criminal. He's a known pedophile and things like that. Errol Barrow. This entire country is conditioned to believe that Errol Barrow butter cannot melt in his mouth. He is the sweetest and nicest thing that ever happened. People regurgitate this narrative and they don't know because they're just taught in school that this is what happened. But people who are alive in that time period can tell you objectively that in fact did not happen. He just showed up right place, right time. He said that one day Barbadians will look around and nothing will belong to Barbados anymore. Now, he wasn't saying that to warn people to guard your finances, guard your assets, take care of the culture and the heritage. He was not saying that for that purpose. He was telling you, soon you will look around and nothing will belong to you. It is just a version of you will own nothing and you will be happy.
Wow.
Okay.
Yes. That was going through my head.
And people don't understand that locally. So it's hard to talk to people here. Now, there are tourists that come here that care more about the country. There are people who come from all out by where you're at. America, Canada, United Kingdom, you name it. They fall in love with the island environment, the relaxed atmosphere, the culture, all of the things that were traditionally created during slave times that carry on as a part of the shared heritage, the shared experience, the shared mind control structure. They want to be a part of that. That's great. They're going to come and they're going to assimilate into the culture because that's their goal, because they like it. That's fantastic. They should have a say in what goes on, the same way a naturalized citizen of the United States would have a say legally through the system. And they've assimilated, they've acquired the shared language, all those things that you mentioned. They're speaking out about it and they're being victimized by this same prime minister, because her tactic is to keep quiet, victimize you when you speak about anything. And she thinks that by victimizing everyone, that's going to create a good result. Now, she has done more than overreach. She's just busted straight through the door and declared that it's all about me. And she's called a general election a year before it's constitutionally deemed fit to do so. Right. Because the narrative that is being pushed is that the opposition party, and anytime you get involved in the game of duopoly, the bipartisan thing, you're wrong, because it's not about one party better than the other. It is about preserving the social structure in a healthy way. And who can do that? It is about finding operatives who are going to act on behalf of the state, which is made up of the population, the entire population, and do what is best for them upon their request, not based on what they think they want to do, because we know that's coming from the cult of global disempowerment. Yep. And so a question I would ask anyone here, there, or anywhere is, do you really think that the system was designed to not go the direction that it has gone? It wasn't. It was all about going this direction from day one. Yep. And they had these people play the long game. Whatever it is they want to do, they give you a certain number of options. And the average person, again, is just in that structure of trying to get by on an hourly basis. So they say, yeah. All right, do whatever you got to do. I'm just working. I'm just trying to feed my kids. I'm just trying to get by. Right. No problem. And so that's how things have gotten this far. So now everywhere I go, if I go to the supermarket today, I know that I'm going to hear Spanish, Guyanese, Trinidadian, American, Canadian, accents. And you have to wonder how many of these people have been hired to come here, work jobs, take money out of the country, and then they disappear, because a lot of them, you see them and then you know that they're not tourists through, they didn't get on a plane and say, I'm going to vacation there for a couple of weeks.
Right.
You see them around for an extended period of time, a year or two, and then they disappear. Right. I see people who live in my neighborhood. They come, they live for a year, and then they disappear. Now, back to the construction part. They're marketing these condominiums for millions of US dollars. They're attempting to sell them to millionaires and billionaires. They're not being constructed for the average person to move into. They're along the coastline. They're destroying the natural habitat of creatures and saying that this is what we're selling to people. Well, you can't destroy it and then sell. So you can't jump on a Amazon package and say, here's your package. You have to return that package, right? So that's what they're doing. That money is not going to go back into the country either. So these millions and billions of dollars that they're saying are going to be coming into the country are going into the pockets of others who have a shared interest in destroying everything. So that's a false narrative too. They're building all these hotels and stuff, but it is a fact from the time when you were here to now, the traffic coming into this country has not increased in numbers. It has become more diverse in terms of the countries, the visitors that want to come here. But it used to be primarily the UK market around the time that you would have been coming here. A lot of it would have been the UK and Canada. Okay. And that's strictly because of the culture of the United States. The work schedule doesn't line up for someone to be free in the wintertime to come here during peak season, right? Then you might come during summer. Like in your circumstance, you were doing work, so you were able to visit the various Caribbean countries and stuff doing work, and your circumstance facilitated that. So there's unique circumstances in which so basically what I'm saying is that tourism isn't wrong. We need it because the system has it designed so that that's how we can purchase oil using US currency and the pounds and currencies that are stronger within the narrative of the monetary fund stuff and all that, right? So there's a lot that goes into it that you have to understand. And it is a dire situation because I said to you in an attempt to balance the conversation on one of your threads that the Muslims here aren't extremists. Right. But they come, actually, many of them come from all over, and they come and they set up their businesses. And what they do is they employ Barbadians. Yeah. Right. And they grow, and as they acquire wealth, they employ more Barbadians. They may send a portion of that back to their family in India, but usually what you will find is that they will bring more of their family over, and they will use the wealth that they have, the assets that they have, give them houses. They will create businesses using shared wealth structures and employ more Barbadians. Right. Right. Yeah. They have children. The children are speaking Barbadian dialect. They assimilate into the language structure. They will go to a Christian church, for example, if there is a school event and their kids are allowed to go in some instances. Other times the children are exempt for religious reasons, which is fine. Sure. Yeah. But they don't say you're bad because you're a Christian, and the Christians don't say you're bad because you're a Muslim, right? Correct. We all just get along together. But in the case of the Latin Americans and the Africans, because the African thing is a huge problem. And you would have heard in that video I sent you on the Rumination Network, that guy was making some serious points about the New World Order and things like that. Now, ordinarily, Caribbean people don't talk like that. So he is one out of a few saying things like that. But he's highlighting how they're going to send the criminal element from the United States, the immigrants that go there, their countries don't want them back. What is the reason the countries don't want them back? Because they have committed crimes. They were allowed to get on a plane, possibly finance, maybe not in all situations, because they could have just gotten on a plane. They could have just been eligible. Knowing how embassies work here, they probably work the same way in other places. So you have people who are conditioned to a narrative, and it isn't cut and dry. So when I say it isn't cut and dry, you can have people who are terrible individuals. They are morally debased. They have no values. They can walk in if they have the money to apply. They can get a job letter fabricated from someone to say, yes, I have permanent employment.
Right.
They can just have a telephone bill, utility bills. They can say, yes, this is where I live. I pay a bill here. And then they can turn out to be criminals and get on a plane, go to the United States, Canada, wherever, and they can come here and do the same thing.
Yes.
And they might slip through the cracks. But now on top of that, there's this facilitation of criminals coming in to every country. This is what I want the listeners to understand, that are going to create problems. Anybody that wants a good example of that, look at the gangs in California, look at traditionally how the Italian mafia is portrayed in television. Well, that's not an exaggeration, right? That is an example of how from time in memoriam, people slipped through the cracks and they created their own criminal element in their own criminal culture.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that all of this is going on. I don't want to keep rambling on about it. We know that all of this stuff has been set up. It's dangerous because we're going to end up fighting with each other. It's dangerous because when you funnel criminals who are traditionally people who are forced into, according to the criminology narrative, what you're taught, they're forced into a life circumstance through desperation. Some get there, they like it, they stay a criminal, and it's all that they know.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the ones that they love it. They're evil from birth. They love it. So you're putting everyone at risk. As a person who is of mixed race, who is literally related to a Benedict Cumberbatch, who's a white actor, a very popular Hollywood actor, through the plantocracy system, we're all intermixed and have different races. Within me, I have French, I have Italian, I have Indian, all these different things, black, white, everything. So everybody's all mixed up from all the way back.
Right.
I can't afford to be racist against anybody. I can only afford to be practical. But the world has always fundamentally been like that. You come here, you see people who are white, and they have what we call a lickety tar brush. They are mixed with black and all kinds of different things. And none of that matters. None of that matters. That kind of ideology where based on your skin color, you are a harmful element is no longer working for us because everybody's been intermixed and intermingling forever.
Yes.
So people need to break that and just focus on behaviors. Focus on what is happening. So like in your situation, that clan mentality is destructive. Black Lives Matter is destructive. It's funded by an organization that is essentially a terrorist organization.
Correct.
Government has become a terrorist organization. It is not about people's empowerment anymore. So what are we going to do? That's the question. What are you, the individual, going to do? Because me and you, Steve, we're not asking the audience to give up bipartisan thinking. We're not asking you to stop supporting your Republican Party or your Democratic Party or your People's Empowerment Party or whatever third party exists in your respective country. We are asking you to do what is right for the sake of your children and your grandchildren. Because I have been making this point, and this is in one of the episodes that got me deplatformed. People say that they love their families, but when it comes down to checking all the boxes and making sure that they do everything that is possible to facilitate their family's freedom, they don't. They don't want to do it. They yield to extreme political beliefs, extreme cultural beliefs, and otherwise extremely destructive beliefs that are held in place by this structure of global disempowerment. What are you going to do about that? Are you going to wake up today and realize that at any moment the ship could turn around? Or are you just going to continue to go along with it?
Right.
Back to you.
Well, that was well said. Great points. I agree with you. My observations on what we can do. First of all, you got to stop watching the news, and you got to stop reading the newspaper, because it's all propaganda, and we can't trust these people. They've shown time and time again. You know, they edit, as example, this woman that just got shot in Minneapolis. They've edited the clips to make it look like this guy just assassinated her. And the point is that if you see this enough times, you do believe it, because we don't control it. Our subconscious sucks all this in, and at some point, our subconscious runs us. Okay, well, it does every day, but that's stuff that keeps coming in. Example, back when COVID hit, we weren't watching mainstream TV then. We haven't for 10 years, maybe. I don't know how long. We record certain shows, and they're golden oldies. I'll be honest. We don't watch any of the new crap because we can't take it. But as we fast forwarded through the commercials, because that's what we do, I can't tell you how many times we saw a commercial in that time period that says you need to wear a mask. I mean, I'm talking hundreds of times. Okay, well, the average guy that's actually watching this, he's now going to believe that masks are real. When that happened, that was in April of 2020. I was beginning preparation for run for local school board, which I did the next year, and my daughter and I ran together, and we both got beat. But because people don't want to hear the truth, hence, can you handle the truth? But that's beside the point. I sent an email to the school board, my local school board. This was April of 2020, with 30 to 35 peer-reviewed studies. The email was 35 pages long. Okay, obviously it was to prove a point, which was that masks don't work. They just don't work. Period. Against any of this. The reason why doctors wear masks while they surgeon is so they don't spit in the wounds. Okay, but then you go on to the next step. In December of that year, at a school board meeting, two of the members of the school board wanted to shut the schools down because COVID was going to kill all the kids. Now, you do realize that anybody under 18 was almost exclusively exempt from getting whatever that was. I'm not even going to call it COVID. I'm going to, whatever it was, okay? But they were exempt, okay? They just didn't get sick, and they didn't die, okay? I mean, way more kids have died from that jab that they give out than from whatever that was, right? The jab is a bioengineered death weapon, but that's beside the point. That's for another day, right? But when you look at this, my message would be to anybody that's listening to this, as I zoom out of this show, is that you just can't, you've got to look for independent sources. You know, I get most of my stuff from Telegram, and is it secure? Probably not completely, but some of the guys that I follow, I mean, are putting things on there, and I don't believe they're AI generated, because a lot of it has content, I believe, that's written by these guys. Here's our challenge, as you know. What and who do you believe anymore? Because AI is so good, they can create me right here with that background saying things exactly opposite of what I'm saying, and it looks like it's me. And so what we have to do is sometimes go a second, third, fourth party to really find out what's going on. I can hit this government thing. I have mixed opinions on this, because what happened is when Trump took over in the United States, some things changed dramatically for the better. And some of it's objective. Okay, it's objective truth. One is the border. Okay, the border got closed. Okay, and millions of people were coming over, and now they're not. That hurt the United States dramatically. And I
think just to jump in there and to talk about that, you know, when we're talking about that kind of stuff, we're not trying to enforce any political ideology or say that Trump is good, because
correct.
we know who Trump is.
Yes.
We know that, fortunately, some of the things that are in his agenda are actually going to align with good.
Yes.
And what we're asking is we're inviting the audience to actually think critically about that and realize that, yeah, you know what? That's what they all kind of do. They all do good and they all do bad. And just because you're evil doesn't mean that you can't do good. And just because you're good doesn't mean that you can't do bad things. Right?
Wise words.
Right. You got to teach. You got to teach.
Yep. Yep. So we have to educate ourselves, self-educate. We need discernment and critical thinking, which is lost. Okay. You know, and I'm gonna go here for just a second. You know, I talk about caffeine. I wrote a book. I'm not anti-caffeine, but caffeine basically is bad for you. Okay. There are some, ironically, there are some things in coffee that are good for you. What you got to do is you got to drink organic Swiss water processed decaf, and then you get the benefits, the polyphenols, the antioxidants. But the pushback on my agenda is so huge because of the cognitive dissonance, because everyone's been programmed to believe that first of all, that at the best, coffee is not bad for you. And there are many people that are pushing coffee is good for you. Again, there's some things in coffee that are good for you, but the caffeine completely obliterates those things because it wipes out all the any health benefits, because it's doing massive damage to your central nervous system and your adrenals and your brain with the adenosine. But it's that belief that they've been programmed that, and they won't. It's that cognitive dissonance, not acknowledging objective truth. You know, we're looking here, you know, it scares me the direction that we're going in the United States of having to use the military to get civil unrest under control. That scares me. And it may happen because, and you know, I know you're aware of this and your listeners may not. The United States is divided, okay? I mean, we are ripe for civil war. And I'm not advocating for that at all, just so you know. And I'm not advocating for violence. But there's the bigger cities are all run by aggressive liberals, okay? We don't even have to go to Democrats anymore. They're not even liberals, they're leftists. And, well, look at New York City. I mean, this guy is an acknowledged socialist, communist, he is Muslim, okay? But that isn't, which really confuses me sometimes, because generally speaking, communism and Marxism don't align with any religion, because communism and Marxism require you to put them as your God. So we have to see how this plays out. Obviously, this guy's a young guy. He got supported by some people to get in there. And it's either going to be a huge cluster, or ultimately he'll get booted out, because so many people possibly are going to be hurt. Just the rent thing and it's chaos, because he has no platform other than free. Everything's free, and you know that's just not realistic. They do these on the street interviews, particularly in New York City, and I've watched some. These people are all for socialism, and they have no idea what socialism is. Socialism is they're taking your money to give to somebody else so that everybody's equal. And I don't ever want that in my lifetime. And neither for my children or my grandchildren, because that is not meritocracy, which is merit-based reward system. It is pure equity. And that is the worst thing in the world that could happen to us. Because now everything, and what it does, and you're aware of this, it leads to no one wanting to work. You know, there's estimated 7 million middle-aged adult males in the United States that are employable that don't work. 7 million. And then they say there's no one to work. And why? Because they're entitled, and that's the reason. They're living with their moms and dads, or they're living off of charity from their parents or their relatives. They have to go to work. if they want something. It's a merit-based system. But we've lost that. We lost that. There's this thing with DEI and social emotional learning, which was a big deal. That's one of the things I ran against when I was in the school board. Social emotional learning basically is telling everybody that your emotions come first and facts don't matter.
Exactly. And it is so illogical because,
Isn't it?
If you go to a therapist, they will tell you that feelings are not facts.
Right.
They never have been.
No.
They will, you go to a neuroscientist, they will tell you that you have an emotional system, your nervous system, and you have the prefrontal cortex, which is rationality. That's how your brain works, kiddies.
Yep.
So when you're talking about this system, again, like with Mom Donnie, I don't get the impression that his Muslim values have anything to do with what he has been seconded to do by the cult of global disempowerment.
I agree.
And they're going to see how, do the same thing they always do, see how public interest sways in his favor, how that works to manipulate the system. And that's the whole reason they've been pushing this DEI thing. But what the average person doesn't want to hear, and this is where people are going to shut this off, is that if a dude chops off his genitalia and decides he wants to be a woman, puts on a suit and goes to work, looking like a woman in a skirt and a jacket in an office, and that corporation is trying to fit in with the DEI thing, and they hire this person. It has the same psychological effect as if they hire someone that has a face full of metal, piercings, and tattoos all over their face. And those people are generally met by another person's subconscious mind as being a threat. Now, it's just the way that the mind works. You see something that is, for all intents and purposes, unnatural, and your mind, your subconscious already knows that it's not normal. What do I do now?
Right.
Okay. So forcing these things on people, anytime you're told that you have to conform, your freedom is being taken.
Yes.
And the issue that we have with stuff like this is that those of us who are mature and understand life and just want to love people, we will see a transgender person walking down the street and we'll be like, hey, how are you? Touch them on the shoulder or whatever, just like we would anybody else, and move on. Well, how we feel about it is not important, but they are conditioned and programmed and told that we are the enemy because we have traditional thinking.
Correct.
And so they're hostile towards us, and we're expected not to retaliate to hostility, or not to just say, be assertive and say, even just casually and calmly, well, I respect you as a person, but I can't be expected to conform to your belief system just to make you comfortable because you're asking me to do the same thing.
Right.
What we can do is we can focus on what we have in common, which is we're human beings. And everything else in between, we can just work on that, and it doesn't have to be a thing.
I watched in recent times, I've watched a 4-part series by a gentleman named Jonathan Pajot. He's a French Canadian philosopher, Christian.
Familiar with him.
You are? Okay. Have you seen or familiar with the End of the World series that he did?
I don't know if I've watched that much, but tell me.
Okay. I'll send it to you. But the point is that what he did is he broke down what's happened in the world. And I found it extremely interesting and pretty much spot on. He said, there's circles. And in the beginning, 50 years ago, and there's spokes. Okay. In the beginning, generally society, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, Canada, United States, and then some of the European countries, the middle of the spoke was based on Judeo-Christian values. And again, this is not a religious thing. This is a value system. Okay. And the value system is you don't do any harm. You try to help your brother and that kind of thing. Okay.
Which
and
in any case, just to remove any further doubts from anybody's minds, Judeo-Christian values are traditional values that extended long before the Christian religion even existed.
Correct.
So continue.
Yes. And I agree with you. Okay. It's a value system. So what he said is that, generally all the societies were based, and then on the outside of the ring there were these spokes, and you had gay marriage, you had LGBTQ, you had trans, you had BLM, okay, all these other things, and they were outside, okay. And what we did in the middle, and I'm putting myself in the middle, okay, because I'm speaking here from what I took away from this, is that we tolerated them, which you just said. You absolutely got right to the core of where I'm going with this, is that we will say hello to a trans person and not think twice. Well, what happened then is that circle started to close in and in and in. And pretty soon, the middle of the circle now is no longer Judeo-Christian values. It's this chaos from the outside. And that's what's running our society now. And because we were tolerant enough to allow them to, here's an example. Barack Obama, when he ran for office, was against gay marriage. Marriage is between a man and a woman. When he's president, he says, okay, we're going to make gay marriage liberal. And I'm not bashing anybody. I know gay people. They're great people, right? That's not the point. They said, this is all we want. If you just give us this, we'll leave you alone. He did it. Then what's the next thing? Now, what are they doing? They're grooming our children in schools to be trans. Okay. And I have firsthand experience here. I had a guy come in, a professor from a university in Green Bay, and he's done a massive research on this. There are schools in southern Wisconsin that have closets where kids come to school and change clothes to be the sex they want to be, and then they rechange before they go back to their parents. They're called changing rooms. Okay, this is happening in Wisconsin, right? So it's happening all over. The point is that this isn't normal. Okay, those parents should know about this. Now again, some of this is changing. Okay, and I think it will change over the next couple of years even more. I'm not.
Steve, do you see
90% of the trans people, if they get counseling, realize that they don't want to be the other sex, that there's underlying psychological. There's a guy named Walt Heyer, okay, and he's in his 80s. I think he's still alive. When he was 45 years old or something like that, he decided he was going to be a woman. He was a woman, so he did the whole thing. He had all the surgeries. He lost everything, lost his family, lost his job. 8 years later, he came to the conclusion that he really was a man. Now, he can't get his penis back, okay? This isn't happening. And what he did then is he retransitioned, and ever since then, he's had a program where he talks to people. Now, you realize in the United States, if a kid goes to their high school counselor and says, if a young guy says, I want to be a girl, I think I'm a girl, they don't have the ability or the right to counsel that kid. They have to put them into a transition program. They can't ever. And what Walt determined is that through his counseling, that 90% of these people really didn't want to be the other sex. And most of them, particularly the men, had been sexually abused when they were young. And what happened is that they in their minds, they believed that if they were a woman, that would never happen again.
I was just going to say to you that if you realize that within the this description of what you said about the changing rooms, that's a double bind. Yep. Because you're allowed to go to school as who you naturally and normally identify. And then you're put into a space that creates shame around what's happening. Yep. Which is fear-based conditioning. So essentially, that person might think they're being given an option, but they're actually not. A double bind. Right. So that's kind of what they're doing to us, and let me just get very technical here for a second. A lot of the times, like in a double bind, you have these patterns or illusions. You see it in the media and political structure a lot. Are you sure? Are you sure that you're sure? Do you just think that you're sure? Are you sure that you could be unsure enough? And so is that why you think you're sure? That's how double bind mind control works and it sounds. So if you answer affirmatively to a question like that, then it's going to trigger doubt in your mind. And that's how they get you on that subconscious level, right? Covert suggestions. It's Ericksonian hypnotic language, actually, is what it is. Well, when he started doing it, that's what it was called, to give him credit for discovering it. But the world controllers already knew, and that was what they were doing for a long time, right?
Yes.
So, you know, we have gay friends, we have gay family. And what is interesting is that they share our ideas on this too. They share our understanding of this and they would radically agree with us.
Yes.
We're all just interested in getting along, honestly, and living our lives individually.
The key to this whole conversation is that we're not against anybody or anything. We want the truth to come out. We want people to understand the truth and what are objective truths, right? Now, there are objective truths. Now, many people are in denial about that, but you know, you've mentioned this a couple times, and I agree with you 100%. The key is that they want us to be fighting with each other. They want civil unrest. Okay, they want anarchy, and you say who benefits from this? The people in power. Okay, Mamdani is a perfect example. You know, he is one of the most powerful people now in the United States. I mean, he runs New York City. That's big. New York City is the financial hub of the world. And he runs it. And he's going to make a lot of money. You can bet when he's out of there, he's going to be a multi-millionaire, even though I do believe he came from a very wealthy family. I think that his parents were college professors or something. I don't get into him because I'm semi-repulsed by the whole idea. And it fascinates me that, well, history isn't taught anymore. You know, true history, you know, I talked to a guy yesterday who him and his wife is learning Latin and he's learning French. And just because they want something to do in their free time and something constructive instead of watching TV, right? And so he said, you wouldn't believe, as I get into this French culture, the French involvement in the development of the United States. You know, they gave us the Statue of Liberty, but they helped us in a number of wars, okay? And he said to me, as I'm looking at this, very rarely, if ever, do you ever see how the French were involved in the development of the United States. That's on purpose because they don't want you to know that other people were helping us. And the cultural things that we have taken from many other countries. I mean, we've only been around for 250 years as a country. You know, I mean, compared to places in Europe, I mean, we're babies, we're virgins, right? Why is this happening? Because they don't want you to know what happened before, and that's the social, and where I was going with this was the socialism. You know, these people have no idea what happened in Cuba, what happened in Venezuela, what happened in the USSR. You know, I'm not saying that Russia is a perfect example, but it's completely different than when it was socialism and communism. I mean, if you look at how many people they killed, millions, tens of millions of people they just killed in the name of the greater good. Okay, when you start to believe this, we are then going to start killing people here. Okay? Now, the good thing in the United States, and this will never change because there will be a war before this changes, is that we still have our guns. Because you realize that they took all the guns away from the people in UK, they took all the guns away from the people in Canada, in Venezuela, in Cuba, okay? And when that happened, you have absolutely no control over your own destiny. And I can say that confidently. In the state of Wisconsin, by the number of people that just go deer hunting, which was back in November, we have the 6th largest army in the world, just in the state of Wisconsin, by guns. Okay, now I know the guns at some point don't matter anymore. They do matter door to door. They don't matter when you drop bombs or use sound weapons and things like this. But the point is that they will never be able to take our guns away forcibly because most of the people, and when I say most, it maybe it's only 60 or 70% will fight. Okay, there's a certain amount of people that will give their guns up. If you look back in Germany, people willingly gave up their weapons, and then look what happened. Okay, but that's history. And who's talking about this? I talk to my grandchildren. They're not learning any of this in junior high and high school. They're not learning any of this. They don't talk about the Holocaust. They don't talk about Venezuela, Cuba, or these other socialist countries. I mean, if you look, Venezuela is a perfect example, and they just deny it, okay? I mean, 25 years ago, it was the third richest country in the Western Hemisphere. I used to travel, and I still travel to Aruba regularly, okay? And I'm going to throw this out there, because when you're talking about all the people in Barbados, I have a good friend now. I've established a relationship with a lady that runs a restaurant that I go to, and I eat with her every morning. We go there at night for supper sometime. She's originally from Curacao, and she knows 4 languages, and she said the Arubian culture is almost gone. It's almost gone because they brought in so many different people, and they have just changed everything. 30 years ago, when I first went to Aruba, the majority of the people that were there were from Venezuela, because you realize Venezuela is right off the coast. Okay, and these people, they were in the casinos. They had money. They were dressed well. They were very friendly. Don't misunderstand me. Okay, now no one's from Venezuela in Aruba because nobody has any money to go there, and it's 45 miles away. I mean, it's literally a short plane ride or a jump on a ferry. Obviously, that isn't happening anymore. But it's amazing. I'm old enough and have enough life experience to see this transition. We see a lot of people now from Europe and Canada are there. Some, and there's a good amount of Americans. Okay, it's still safe, and that's why we go there. It's very well policed. If you, I don't know about Barbados what the safety situation is.
My goodness, the safety situation here is out of control. Every single day, you're hearing about someone getting shot, or they're getting robbed, or whatever the case is. And again, the government is facilitating that.
Yeah,
they are. There's a situation where they're actually thinking that the solution is to pay these gang members to not go out and commit crime. But what happens when the money's done, right?
Right. Yeah.
So basically, as taxpayers, we are giving the government this money, and they're giving it to drug lords. So what are the drug lords going to do with that money? Buy more drugs and sell it, right? And get richer, right?
That's right.
And they're just going to agree to not kill anybody, but they're still going to sell drugs. They're still going to create situations where people will not know themselves on a spiritual level.
Right.
Self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Potentially become criminals out of desperation and addiction, etc. But you touched on something that you said earlier, where this culture of entitlement and nobody wanting to work is the big issue. Now, for me, I'm unhireable because I think for myself, I've always been unhireable. Yep. Because what happened is I left school with an associate degree in English literature, mathematics, Caribbean history, communication studies. I can get any job I want with that associate degree alone. People don't want to hire someone who's well educated, who can think for themselves. They want the order follower, the coffee drinker, who's just going to slam cups of coffee all day to get through the day, do a bunch of arduous work they don't even necessarily understand or think about because the boss says so.
Right.
And I had to learn then entrepreneurial skills and try to survive as a musician and try to make some money that way. Realized that wasn't working no matter where I went. And go back to my second love, which was psychology and things like that, to try to make some money off of that. Now, I also happen to be an audio engineer, so I get to pick up a little bit of extra cash from that too. But you have to be willing to work because there's nobody that's going to give anything to you. No. But these youngsters are conditioned to think that that's folly, that that's not true, that if you just exploit people or go rob somebody when you want something, want a new PS5, let's just go steal it. You know, you want a car, go sell drugs, things like that. The culture of entitlement is just so bad that you go to the cashier at a supermarket and you put your stuff on the conveyor belt, and she looks at you like you just committed a crime, and she's like, sucks her teeth. She can't believe that she has to check your groceries.
Right.
She does it in the slowest possible manner. She isn't paying attention because she's talking to all the other women around her, supervisors included.
Yep.
So the supervisor then has to come and give a void at least 2 times before you get through the cash register. So you're there at the checkout for 10 minutes, dealing with absolute indiscipline and entitlement and a disrespectful attitude. So the government then gets to use that as an excuse as to why they have to hire non-nationals and foreigners.
Right. Exactly. They create the environment that they want, so they get the desired results that they want, not what's good for you and I or the people of your country or my country. And I know, they just they're raising the minimum wage in a city to $20 out in, I think, Seattle or Portland, which are extremely liberal leftist enclaves. And California as well. And so what happened is the minute they announced it, people laid off a number of people. They closed some restaurants because a lot of this has to do with fast food. Now, a high school kid that used to get these jobs for $6, $7, $8 an hour, they aren't hiring this kid anymore at $20 an hour. They're going to hire somebody that probably has some experience. All they've done is hurt the lower and middle class and hurt people that just want a part-time job. I mean, let's face it, I've worked since I was 11 years old, right? I've never stopped working. I always wanted to work, and I always had what I needed to survive. And sometimes I got to, I still get to travel. I still get to go to Aruba every year because we work hard for it, not because anybody's giving it to us. And it sounds like I'm on a pedestal. I'm on a pedestal here, and I don't want it to come across like that. You said it yourself, and I agree with you 100%. If you want to get anywhere, you have to do it. No one's going to do it for you. No one's coming to save you. And this thing, like the socialists that we're going to save you, they can't save you because somebody has to pay for it. And the people that are going to pay for it, one, are going to run out of money or they're going to leave. Now, in the United States, there's a certain amount of panic amongst normal people like me. Is that what happens when the money runs out and they start to come and take my belongings? I mean, part of the policy of the mayor of New York City is to publicly take private property and distribute it among the people that don't have it. And that is insane because all they're going to do is destroy it because they don't appreciate it because they didn't work for it. You don't appreciate anything you don't work for. You appreciate what you've done. I work hard. My wife works hard to do the things we do. I'm not doing a podcast for shits and grins. Okay. I'm doing it because I'm going to address objective truths and the pushback against them. And people that have a lot of cognitive dissonance they're not going to watch it. And if they watch it for 5 minutes, they're going to turn it off because they can't handle it. It goes back. And I got this line basically from Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. I don't know if you've ever seen it. When Tom Cruise he's got him on the stand and he said, "I want the truth." And Jack Nicholson looks at him and says, "You can't handle the truth." And what a classic line. Because the truth is that what that guy was doing was absolutely immoral and illogical, but what he felt was in the best interest of the government or wherever the situation was. And it wasn't probably. But you can't handle it. And my neighbor during COVID, I didn't have a lot of discernment at that time. I have no compassion. And he got the jab. And I said, "Man," do you realize that this is not safe and effective? They did no studies. I have a vaccine-injured grandson, okay? I've been in the vaccine rabbit hole for 13 years. Okay, I understand. You don't get vaccines in 6 months, okay? And then, other than the fact that none of them work anyway, because they're not double-blind placebo studies. But that's another. But he said to me, because I told him, I said, the government does not have your best interest in mind. And he looked at me and he said, yes, they do. He said, the government is there to take care of me and protect me. And I ended the conversation then, because I knew that this was going to be a situation where I am butting my head up against the wall and I'm going to be bruised and bloodied when I'm done, because he is not going to listen to me, because he believes that. And to this day, he still believes it. Now, we didn't talk for 2 years. Okay. And now we have casual conversations now, but he's there. And the vast majority of our population here is where he is. And that scares me. And so my job is to influence. I can't make anybody do anything. And you know, I've talked about this with you before. We all have free will and free won't. I can't make you do anything. You can't make me do anything. However, I can throw out ideas so that people can reevaluate their relationships, whether it's caffeine, whether it's the government, whether it's criminals, whether it's Somalis, whatever the case, whether it's Hmongs, you know, in my case, they're right here. Okay. I'm very comfortable with them all the time. You know, we don't have a lot of other ethnic people here. And if you don't count all the Polish people, you know, I mean, we've got these European people where we have, you know, my wife's grandma never learned how to speak English. She spoke Polish. So my wife actually learned a little bit of Polish when she was young. Now that was her grandma. That was her great grandma. Her grandma actually talked English and Polish. Point is, tolerance and grace and discernment are necessary for us to have change. I can't talk to somebody that won't listen to anything that I have to say. And you know this. You understand exactly what I'm saying here. It is a catch-22. You know, I mean, there are people on the conservative side in the United States that try to debate people on the other side. They won't, because they have no facts. You know, a debate is not about opinions. A debate is about facts. And when you start to talk about some of the things that are happening in the world, not just the United States, in the whole world, and it's happening to you where you live, when you start to look at the objective truths and the objective facts, nobody wants to talk about them on the other side. You bring it up and you're deplatformed, right? Because they don't want to hear this stuff. and it's glaringly obvious to me that there is a certain part of them now in our area in the United States. You know, our people have generally in the past broken this down into Democrat and Republican, and that's no longer the case, because there's now a faction of the Democratic Party that is so far to the left that they are Marxist socialists. Okay. And they still they like this guy, Mandami calls himself a democratic socialist. That's an oxymoron, okay? Because you can't be that, okay? But there's a certain amount of Democrats now, and I know a lot of them, realizing that they have been trapped into making a choice. Either you follow us or you're a piece of crap. You're just like the MAGA people. You're just like Steve, okay? I mean, I believe in a lot of the MAGA things, okay? But not all of them, by any means, just so you know. And the Make America Healthy Again, I mean, there's things that are happening as we speak that I only dreamed about 10 years ago. You know, they've taken off a lot of the vaccines off the childhood schedule. Now, granted, the states can still override that, but I have personal experience with vaccine injury, okay? And the bottom line is that it happens, and it's not all vaccines. There's glyphosate, there's mercury, and all, you know, that's a whole nother topic. But the point is that if we can't get out of this loop, and we have to get more people to believe what you and I believe, that the discussion and debate is good, and don't come with opinions. You need to come with facts, because opinions I just, when I was talking to this guy yesterday about the French thing, we were talking about opinions and debate and stuff. And he said, opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one, and some of them are just shitty. And I just cracked up because what a great analogy. Because, and my neighbor who's from Canada, this is a different neighbor, but he's been here for 45 years, and he thinks that the Canada has the best healthcare system in the world, and their socialist system is fantastic. I said, why don't you move back there? Well, I like it here. And then he said, I'll debate you anytime. I said, I have no problem debating you, Dennis. I said, but you can't come to a debate with opinions. You need to come to this debate with objective truths. And because one of the things I said to him is, I said, why is it that wealthy Canadians come to the United States for operations and procedures? Because they have sometimes a year to 2 year long wait, and they'll be dead before they actually get that operation, because it's a socialist system, and it doesn't come on it comes in as you go in. And if you're in line and you die, tough shit, right? And I know that's a little crude, but that's the way their system works. And you know what? He can't give me an answer to that. He can't, because there is no logical answer. And that's when you look at the people that we disagree with on the left, not even liberals. Liberals will talk. Bill Maher is a perfect example. I am not a fan. In fact, years ago, I refused to even listen to him. All of a sudden, I see clips. I don't watch his show, but I see reels of clips. He's making more sense than a lot of conservative Republicans. I mean, wow. I have to go like this and say, am I listening to this guy? Because he actually understands some things. He understands that we can't allow this trans agenda to take over. He understands that some of the things that are going on the left are killing us. They're killing our country.
You know what's crazy about the whole thing is that Bill Maher is not really a great person. But then again, that's another example of how somebody that isn't really a great person can then share ideas that fall under traditional moral and ethical values. And the thing about it is that the only reason he has a platform is because the shit that he says is mostly unhelpful, right?
Exactly.
So every once in a while, he'll get to say something that might make sense.
This light bulb goes off in his head.
But like CNN, what they're actually doing now. So, all right, let me actually go back a little bit before that. During the pandemic, what they started doing was they know, because they're the mind controllers, they know that if you can make something fun and it's harmful, you can get people to do it. Yep. So they were using comedy to sell the narrative. They actually had a comedy show that they set up on CNN to sell these narratives that are in place now, all the DEI and the vaccines and all that. Now what they're doing is they're waiting until about 11 at night, 10 Eastern Standard Time, and they're having this show. So you have all these people from both sides. They're Democrats and Republicans. They're black, they're white, they're mixed race, they're Asian, all that. And all they do is they argue. And so they're giving people an example of what immature discourse looks like.
Yes. So
that people will think that that's acceptable behavior.
Exactly. Yep. And it's not. We need to sit down with people. You know, I don't have a lot of lines in the sand. Okay. I have one. Okay. I won't share it with you, but I have one line. And other than that, I'll listen to just about anything else. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's abortion. Okay. That's my personal line in the sand, because that baby is actually a human being. And anybody that's had a baby or has witnessed a baby being born realizes that baby is actually alive in the womb. And my body, my choice is not your body. That's a human being in there. That's my line. And other than that, I can talk to anybody on the left about just about anything and at least listen to them, but they won't listen to me. And that's where the problem is.
The interesting thing is that your identity is not a Republican. You just want humans to be happy.
Yes.
That's your identity.
Right. I don't identify as a Republican anymore.
Now, the thing
I,
is that
I,
is confusing is when you share values that are traditional across the board, right? And you
Yep.
find yourself in a position where you're disagreeing with people, both Democrat and Republican, or whatever the case is, and they are saying that they support these systems, but yet they disagree with morality and
Right.
ethics and common
Yes.
sense. This is what makes the situation so dangerous, because if you can't have a conversation with someone about something in a calm manner, you can't have a relationship with that person.
No, that's
at
right.
all. And that's one of the reasons why me and my parents never really got along, because I noticed that they were just way too immature and everything. They were always right. Even to this day, one of them's dead, but the one that's alive, never wrong about anything. I had an argument with my parent about the location of something.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to describe the location. She's describing the location. And I ended up saying to her, but you have to remember that we're talking about the same location. We're just referencing different landmarks.
Right.
And she's like, I'm like, why is it that you always have to be right about everything, to the fact that you can't even move on past it? Because I'm telling you, just tell me what your point is. Tell me the point that you're trying to get to.
Right.
And she started an argument.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can't do anything with that.
No.
And the tactic with many people like that is to raise their voice and get louder.
Yeah.
And when somebody gets louder like that, that's how you know they're wrong. That's how you know that is a belief system playing out, or that is just wanting to act from an unregulated nervous system. In which case, I don't care if you're mommy, daddy, granny, whoever, I'm going to effing steamroll you, because I can get louder than anybody else. But I don't do it unless I feel like, okay, yeah, I'm going to have to raise my tone of voice here, use this person's technique to get them to understand that I'm just not about this.
Right.
Because the first thing I'm going to ask you when I raise my voice and I start shouting is, could you have any common sense? Could you have any common sense with the way that you're behaving? Could you have any common sense? And then they say, why are you shouting? Because you started by shouting and I shouted over you so that you could hear me ask you, could you have any common sense? Do you think that your behavior is appropriate? Because if my behavior is inappropriate to you, then why is it not true on your end?
Correct.
And then I leave the conversation and the room.
Yes. Yeah.
So then they realize that they can't mess with you now, right?
It's really interesting how you tied in common sense, which we started out with about 2 hours ago, right? And what it does, you tied it all together, because that's what it is. We just have a total lack of common sense in our societies, not just my society in general.
Yeah. So like in that example, I gave that example on purpose. Not that I want to air my dirty laundry, but that when she was describing the location, I opened up my phone, I looked at Google Maps, I pulled up the map, and I said, I don't understand why you're trying to be right about this. I'm looking at the map right now. I can see it right here. We're talking about the same location. There's no need to take it that direction. Okay? So there's this absolute refusal, no matter what it is, by the average person on any issue to even acknowledge that, yeah, there's a map. There's concrete evidence.
Right.
And that's what's going to cause us to die. That, like you were saying, that's what's going to cause civil unrest, political unrest. And I wanted to highlight before we wrap this up, Bulgaria has had an issue with civil unrest where the government had to resign. Mexico has had issues where they rolled up on the government building and rioted and ousted certain members because of civil liberties being taken away. It was Nepal that they had that big fallout the other day that was orchestrated by a younger generation because they don't know anything but digital technology.
Right.
And so they wanted to maintain, their question was, how are we going to live and work and exist if you try to regulate the internet, right? The media is covering up these things. I can't remember where it is. I saw it yesterday, another article, and I have to research it to make sure that it's actually valid, that it's actually happening, because there was a false one going around about Italy, and everybody I know in Italy is like, yeah, there's no protest going on here.
Right.
So these people are disseminating infactual information too, so you have to double check everything. the internet exists, while we can still talk to each other, ask people in China what goes on in China. Ask people in India what goes on in India, and get as many perspectives as you can, because I don't want to be cliche. The Solomon Asch experiment from the 1950s about group conformity is the classic example to understand how peer pressure influences individual judgment. I doubt that there's anybody on the internet that doesn't know this, but the experiment, basically, you had participants that were put into a group with people who were in on the experiment. They were shown a simple task. It was a line that was on a board, and they said, choose which of these three lines match the length of the original line. The problem is that the ones that were in on it deliberately gave the wrong answers to see if the real participant would conform to the group's incorrect choice. That is the media. That is what the internet is for. The internet ended up being about entrepreneurship and financial gain and bridging connections with others just by happenstance, but it was never created for that. It was created for experiments on us to turn against each other.
I want to just touch base on that experiment.
Sure.
The people that are listening to this, and you can go on YouTube, you can go anywhere and find this. 60 to 80% of the people ultimately went along with the other people
with the wrong answer.
With the wrong answer, because they wanted to be part of the crowd, part of the herd, right? So then that's important note there. Because it's not just the fact that way more than half were basically bullied into agreeing that line that was this long
is 10 feet long.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it's a powerful
and that's
reminder.
Peer pressure. Yep.
Yeah. It's a powerful reminder. So let's wrap this up and leave people with that powerful reminder that we are influenced by the people around us, whether we like it or not. Wisdom, maturity, and strength of character means that we have to accept that, understand that the strength of social conformity and how easily our individual judgments can be swayed is a lot weaker than we care to admit. And this podcast is a wake-up call about the importance of trusting your values and questioning your beliefs and standing firm in the face of group pressure and asking questions about what's being done to you and who's making the decisions for you, because ultimately you are an individual, that you have responsibilities, families to take care of, and we are all each other's keeper. What that means is that we have a moral, social responsibility to question the social constructs that have been built around us. And if you cannot see that things are being done to violate that system, that happy, easygoing, peaceful system that we used to have, why is that?
Correct.
How often are you going along with something just because everyone else is?
Yeah.
How often do you make someone else wrong or a victim because it's difficult for you to process what you think about it? Life is not meant to be difficult like that. You are not supposed to feel by natural order shame and guilt and fear because you have a brain and you use it to think. This has been another episode of Boundless Authenticity. I want to thank Steve Frazier for being on and presenting this remarkable amount of information. Steve, tell us where we can find you.
Right now, the best spot is at releasethecoffeecuffs.com. I have a contact page. I have information. I have different programs, a lot of education, a lot of material. I'm putting on a self-sabotage section and a faith-based self-sabotage section, which will be up in about a week or two, which will be mid-January of 2026. And the key is, if you want information, I will respond, okay? And I will share whatever I can with you, and I will help you. Unless you sign up for a program, I'm going to just help you. Okay. I have changed my intention from trying to make money to trying to help people. And I believe that by trying to help people, the rest of the stuff will come into line. Okay. And so it's an intention-based concept that I'm taking. That's why I'm doing the podcast. And I hope someday that I can have you on as a guest, because I'm sure there's some wonderful things that you can share with me that you haven't shared with me today. And so, but that's how you get a hold of me right now. I'm changing that over. It will be under a new domain name called stevefrazier.net. And when you go to that new domain name, it automatically will show the coffee cups to Self-Sabotage. And the only time that when we actually switch domain names, there's a transition where the website's down for 2 to 3 days through the domain process. But otherwise, release the coffee cups at pm.me. That's my email address. And I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure as always, and I'm sure we're going to do this again.
I'll tell you what, Steve Frazier is a great guy to get up and talk to first thing on a Saturday morning.
There you go.
Not a better person. All the links to Steve will be in the show notes.
Excellent.
You're listening to the Boundless Authenticity Podcast, where we discuss everything related to the evolution of human consciousness.
At the very least, people need to understand that the United States builds bunkers, which are basically cities underground, every 3 months.
Basically, when you dream, you tap into your subconscious. It is your nocturnal intuition, your creativity and imagination unchained from conscious reason, ego and logic.
They're biologically alive, but they have no soul. They have AI consciousness. They can alter your conscious of the brain to get the brain.
We live in a multidimensional reality, whether it comes through esoteric information in the spiritual realms or the UFO people, experiencers, or mainstream through quantum physics and through mainstream science now realizing that parallel dimensions probably exist.
We're all spiritual beings. We're all having these human experiences. We've heard that phrase over and over and over. But what does that really mean?
You know, all the big questions of life, we have these answers inside of our souls.
We're ultimately studying the nature of what it is to be human, good and evil, our psychology, how we think, and our health. That's why I love Bruce Lee's great quote, all knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge.
The Boundless Authenticity Podcast.